Jay. How's it going?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
It's always good to see you. And, for the people who are listening in, I have to say this is going to be a person who I've known for quite some time. Got a little disconnected when I moved to the East Coast, but was so happy to see him when I came back to the California area. And just one of the people who, especially in my early career in mental health, was really driving home points around cultural competency, cultural humility actually was the term you introduced me to. Why don't you tell people a little bit about who you, I know you now as an administrator, activist, but yeah, why don't you say a little bit about yourself so folks can place you?
Sure. Well, currently I'm an administrator in the local behavioral health in the county of Marin. I'm the behavioral health director. I'm a person of color. I'm a transgender individual. I grew up in the Philippines. I'm an immigrant. So those are some of the spaces that I sort of occupy right now and have occupied for a while.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how you moved from being a provider to then doing training and education and then becoming an administrator? Yeah, what was that like?
Well, maybe I'll start with my journey, actually, just to go to
cool.
mental health is, I am a person who's a family member that I actually have grown up seeing family members who have a mental health and substance use condition. And so I saw the impact of that. And my own sort of experience, I think, of really seeing folks when they're unwell and how other people are affected by it. And so, I wanted to become actually a medical doctor, but I often believe that somebody chose my fate and sort of led me to psychology. I was in undergrad wanting to get some, health classes, but I took this psychology class that blew my mind. We had a professor there that talked about, she actually was a lawyer, but she said that she loved psychology so much and really understanding that she kept teaching. And so I was just blown away by change of behavior, humility, using ourselves as tools to help other people. And I was just fascinated by it. So I went to psychology, went to behavioral health sciences. And then I sort of saw myself wanting to sort of see what are things that we need to learn? What are the newer things? So I happened to be fortunate to come to the United States to go to graduate school. Because I really wanted to work with people. I envisioned myself, in a hospital or working in clinics, talking to people. And so I was trained to be a psychologist who have a focus on substance use and trauma. Really, sort of that's the work. But there were people around me in my work who said hey, I think, Jay, you're good at policy, or you're good at program development, or you're really creative at thinking of how to, do things differently. So would you be interested in, in different spaces? So myself, I figured sure, why not? I wanted to try it. And I guess I'm good at it. So
no guessing, you're good at
it. And so I found spaces. And the one thing that I think people had, I would often say I don't know if I can do that. I don't have all this technical expertise. But one of the things that I've heard mostly is you have a way to bring people together. Right? I think people know that at the core of who you are is really building relationships. So I believe, when I was starting out as a therapist, I believe that we can, instill change, foster change through relationships. It's trusting relationships with people. We can, if we have that, I feel like we can, hold their hand, they can trust us, we can think about things that are different, we can explore risky things, taboo things, because there's trust. So for me, I think people see that at the end of the day, the core value is building relationships that really saves the world.
Wow, that is so powerful. And now I know why I think we get along and why I was, and I'll put it this way, professionally attracted, because it was well, here's this person who seems, first of all, very authentic, sincere, and very about the human, like touching the human soul. That's what I thought about you when I first met you, and many times that I've seen you speak. It's I think sometimes, I use the word that you're an activist, and sometimes people think of activists as sort of the people who are outside of the system, kind of raise fists. And somebody said to me the other day, they've got the pitchforks and the burning kind of bush things, and they're coming at people. That's an activist. But in fact, I think you bring a lot of humility, and that makes it, I think, in one way, easier for people to enter into spaces that might feel discomforting for them. And I've learned a lot from you about that as well, is that, how do you hold space for people where we might not be in agreement, but we're trying to have conversation and we don't want to shut people off. And you have this ability to do that really, really well.
Oh, thanks. I mean, and I really believe, I believe that we need everybody to make changes. Like there's no one is dispensable, right? I feel like really what we need is to bring people together to create that change, because this work can't be done by one person.
Yeah.
Like we need multiple facets. So, but if we don't create spaces where we can show up as our full selves, then I mean, what are we doing this work for? Like I feel like that's the piece. And I also believe that leadership and change happens in different levels, right? So I grew up, in the 70s, and there was a very much political unrest in the Philippines while I was growing up. And there were activists who were on the streets and protesting, but there were also activists who were taking care of the people that were protesting, right? They were giving them water and food, giving them places to sleep. They weren't shouting at the top of their voices, but they were so critical for the people who were marching and doing the change that they were taking care of them.
Yes.
So I'm thinking like we need that relationship in all the things that we do.
Yeah, everybody has a role. Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. How did you get interested in cultural humility work?
Oh my, I grew up in a kind of third world country, and sort of I saw, how people benefited when they had wealth and resources. We were middle class, so I saw that. I remember my mom growing up, worried about putting food in the table. So I kind of understood. And then really just sort of seeing the disparities around. And, I came from a different, country. I came here as as a graduate student, and I just saw the disparities. People would say like during spring break, like, oh, you want to go to Tahoe? And I'm like, I'm working 24/7 to pay my bills, right? Or let's go to the movies every Friday. And like, I can't afford that because I'm working. And sort of I saw that. And also in Daly City, which I was living at that time, I saw the disparities of many of the immigrant communities there, access to resources. And so I was really trying to understand that a little bit. I didn't have much words, obviously, until I went to graduate school about, equity, equality, inclusion. Also, but growing up in a country where you have to fight for your freedom, and sort of seeing people like literally dying on the streets for them to be free. So that for me, I think has been there. And then in grad school, we were taking all these, how to work with LGBTQ folks, how to work with Asian Americans. And I'm just thinking like, wow, you take a class to understand that. And then, but not all Asian Americans fit in this criteria. Not all indigenous people fit in this criteria. So I was really struggling with sort of that notion of, like you have to be perfect and you have to be competent because people are complex.
Yes.
One day I was doing research and I read this article from Dr. Melanie Tervalon about really cultural humility, and that blew my mind. Her principles of like that you're engaged in a lifelong process, that you have to actually understand power differences, like you have to really work with community in this work. And then most importantly, that organizations and infrastructures have to be accountable and responsible to do the work also, because it's not an individual issue. Like the work of equity is not by one individual. In organizational agencies, structures need to be responsible for it. That just blew my mind. So I was so attracted to that notion. And when you just think about it, like, oh, it was just like life changing for me. I reached out to actually Dr. Tervalon a few times, didn't hear. And then one day, I feel like there's this notion that when the student is ready, the teacher shows up. I reached out again for like the third time, and she responded. And I just said that, her teachings, reading her teaching changed my life. And so we established sort of a connection And really, she is helping still at this point, helping me understand the value of really a change in attitude, a change in perspective that none of us can ever, get her to be super competent, because people are complex, things are changing, but there are specific key things that we need to consider when we are moving towards an anti-racist organization or anti-racist practice, or really create equity for people. So that I'm passionate about cultural humility, as you can
Yes.
imagine, but just because it's just like a really, really great concept and a great tool.
Yes, when you're doing this work, especially as an administrator of a behavioral health system that has to meet the needs of everybody in the community, that's the mandate of public health. Well, everybody with serious mental health conditions and substance use conditions, et cetera. How do you help people see sort of the differences that exist in the populations that you are serving, and some of the work that still needs to be done to make those services aligned with the communities that you're supporting?
For me, my North Star is, can I create systems that are much better, much more equitable for all people, right? That's the goal. So I try to be at least thinking about what's the impact of my decision right now, and can there be a bigger impact, so that even when I'm gone, these little dents or this little course correction actually will remain and create bigger waves of change, because I know I'm just a small speck in this universe, and my time here is really limited. So that's the piece that I work every day. And then the other one, I try to put my perspective, while my perspective is not all and be all, of really what it's like when there are barriers, right? So as an immigrant, as a transgender individual, I try very hard to be as authentic as I am, and share that experience from a different perspective. That's what I try to do. And people disagree, some might agree, but I feel like that's something that's just important for me. So I look at the impact of a decision that has policy implications or programmatic implications. I try to, as you know, I'm a storyteller too. I like telling stories. Like, that's for me how I connect with people, because stories heal. Stories create connectivity and creativity. So that's how I try to tell a different story from folks that are used to hearing the same story.
Yeah. So speaking of stories, when I first met you, you had not started the transition yet, I don't believe. And then when I came back from DC, I'll never forget, you walked up to me and you said, "Karis, it's Jei. It's Jei." And it's like, I know it's Jei. And I had to go, "Oh, but I do know it's Jei, right?" So it was like, okay, this is not shocking for me. I know it is Jei. Thank you very much. But I think, you are, at least as far as I know, and again, having worked at the federal government, seeing a lot of what's out there in our states and localities related to, who's doing what in mental health, particularly who's leading the agencies. Are you one of the only out transgender folks?
At least I think we know that in California. I'm probably
California.
Yeah, in California, we don't know. And somebody had actually said, you might actually the first openly transgender behavioral health director in the country. There's that sort of pressure, like, oh God, please don't screw this up, right? So there's that pressure, right? And so I take take that seriously, because it's important. Representation is important, but also authenticity. And I feel like people had said, well, and sort of my stories about like people coming up when I first was coming out as trans, I would be in meetings where people on the side would be talking like, oh, that's the transgender man. And I'm thinking like, oh, I'm in a community meeting facilitating a conversation of mental health and substance use. Why are people focused on that? And, and so I think that's, for me, it's really important. But it also to talk about transgender people can be leaders in many different forums, shapes, sizes. So somebody told me, there are actually transgender leaders in this, in different fields. But say, well, that makes sense to me if you're in an LGBTQ organization. Well, yeah. And I said, no, that's not okay. A transgender individual can be as successful in any organization, right? Yeah. And so I think that's really what I'm hoping to, is that perspective, but also just my own sort of authenticity about it, and to be unapologetic about who I am and the perspective of, but when you saw me, I think the last time we saw each other, obviously I had been thinking about it, and then finally had I think, I don't know, the courage, maybe just in my own, coming to my own self and say,
Mm-hmm.
I really need to be who I am. I need to figure out a way to just show up and live a truly authentic life. And so I actually came out, at work, but I was lucky that many of the leaders there embraced it and didn't bat an eye and said, what can we do to support you? So I
Yeah.
think that helped quite a bit in sort of my journey now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful, and I'm glad you're unapologetically you and authentically you. And hopefully, this gives I want to say courage, but certainly helps other folks who are thinking about, well, what is their journey? How do you show up authentically you? I mean, many times, for myself, people want to put me in the black bubble. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I could do anything. I don't have to. When I used to work in college admissions work, the first jobs folks wanted me to do was minority admissions. And I'm like, but I can work with everybody. I really wanted to do international admissions because I had lived internationally most of my life. But people couldn't see me in that role. It's like, but you're black. And I'm like, and your point? And what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? So it's kind of like, it doesn't really make any sense to think about it that way. So I'm really appreciative that you're also helping people see that, we can be leaders in anywhere that we want to be leaders or have any roles anywhere. And you've talked about policy a couple of times, that sometimes, that's a huge lever for us to understand where does a policy sit in order to also drive change. Did you learn that while you were going through school, or was that something that you learned kind of OJT on the job?
Yeah, it's on the job. Like, so when I started my public service career in the county of San Mateo, and Mental Health Services Act was sort of just slowly coming in. And so I really had a perspective of, let's really look at our resource and see what's our long term, right? So if we just are reactive about like now, we can't build the infrastructure. But so I knew about program development, but I was sort of curious about, well, you need policies to help shape and shift things to create that infrastructure. So it's just like, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we create change? We change policies, procedures. We work with, electeds. We think about the community effect and, who you engage. So I actually learned that. And in my opinion, policies need to be grounded by community work. Like, it has to work operationally from the ground. Like, I love the new ideas that most of our legislative folks are thinking about, but they have to connect to like, will this work when I implement this? Because oftentimes they had really great visions about what this legislation will create, and not realizing like, oh, that's really good in theory, but in practice, it's a mess.
Yes.
Right. And then we have to create another policy to undo that mess. So
yes. Yeah.
Change happens in all levels. We can't just look at change in one level. For me, true transformational change really is about looking at all the levels, engaging everybody that both has a direct interest in it, but the one that are mostly significantly impacted sometimes are not on those tables. And so how do we bring them together? And sometimes these processes will take time, and I'm okay to wait for some longer time and extending time, because we really need to do the work, and not just like, well, we need this right now, we need this, tomorrow or a week. Let's make a decision. And I feel like, oh my gosh, 2 months, maybe a year from now, we're gonna create another program to undo what we just did.
Yes,
waste of time.
And then how do you bring people who are not at the table, who have not traditionally been at the table, how do you bring them to the table and support them to participate in those tables? So a lot of times those stakeholder, participatory groups have their own culture, an own way of kind of doing the work. And then when other folks show up and can't do it within those cultural norms, then you blame the people and you don't invite them back. Yep. Right? Versus kind of saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to orient everybody, including the folks who have been at the table historically, around like, this is not even saying this is how we do things. We could say this is how we do things, and also be open to how can we do it better to make sure that more people can be involved. And then how do we support each other as leaders? I know, I think we were talking about that at some point in our careers around, sometimes what I find, as a leader of color in particular, there are few people that I could reach out to who I can talk to maybe about some of the things that I'm going through as a leader, as a person with lived experience becomes fewer, fewer and far between, where I can feel comfortable saying, well, I might be struggling with this, I might be struggling with that, and or just need support. I just kind of need some mentorship or support to get through whatever tough time I'm going through. And then I also want to be able to turn around and mentor and support others as well. When you're a director of a county behavioral health system, that, where do you find that support when you're in that kind of leadership role?
I mean, I will say to you, that's one of the struggles that I'm actually sort of facing, is there aren't many people that you can talk to, like I can talk to. And so I've been in that journey as well, thinking about who are the folks and, slowly reaching out. And that takes time. You have to build a trusting relationship with folks that you can just say, like, look, what happened to me? Like I screwed up. I was an idiot, or, whatever, right? But without being judged. And I think that stuff, and especially when you're a person of color, because the expectation of you is that you're perfect to even be considered credible. Like, it's not like you have the technical expertise, the credibility, the education. It's not even just that you are perfect. Right?
Yes.
So when you are kind of falling apart, the people that start doubting you. And so over time, I have a few people that I can reach out to. But it's hard. And I'm really hoping to change that. That's actually one of the things that I'm hoping to do in this next phase of my, I turned 51 this year.
It's a baby.
And so I actually started thinking about, like, what's really important to me. People of color, leaders of color need the support, and real support, not just support so that you can look like a white leader, right? But a leader that's really in your own voice authentically, because our leadership styles might look differently from what people think is a leader. And so I want to change that. I want to really help shift vulnerability, right? That we can say, oops, I screwed up there, but it's really more focused on the relationship. So this notion, when I was, sort of going up the ranks, people will say, well, you needed more experience with budgets and technical stuff and learning how to negotiate residential. But I'm like, I don't know if I can ever be fully there. Yeah. But what I'm good at is really the relationship building. That for me is what they call soft skills, when in my opinion really are the
hardest
kick-ass skills, right? Yes. Yeah, it's the hardest skill to have, right? And I often like, well, why is that? Why do we keep focusing on the technical skills when what we're seeing is really the kinds of leaders that can help move mountains is the relationship. And so I struggled that for a long time. And now I'm thinking, like, because we never focused on that. And now I want to try to figure out ways to support emerging leaders that are doing this work, that are in spaces that are oftentimes ask them to be somebody different. Yeah. But how do they show up in their full selves and unapologetically as their full selves, confident, and then ready to just do the work. And I feel like we don't have that. And so if you have ideas.
I do have ideas. I do.
I would love to think this through.
Oh my gosh. This is so powerful because, I think the same thing. And one of the things I remember it was either when I was in high school or college, I can't remember, my parents had to help me think about a little trick. So there was always something, I was born in Germany and moved around because my father was in the military. But one of the things that they had kind of impressed upon myself and my brother is that there's an expectation people have, particularly of African Americans, and that expectation is low. And so and again, whether that's true today or not, but in general, that was their feeling about the expectation. And I know a lot of Black folks are like shaking their heads. Oh yeah. So one of the things my parents told us is, when you enter the classroom, sit in the front of the classroom. Always have your books out ready and prepared. Raise your hand. Don't wait to be called on. Things that kind of said, we're here, we're prepared, we are engaged, we're breaking whatever stereotype you have about Black folks in education. We're going to break that down for you right now. So that was kind of like first grade all the way up, right? So in college, one of the things my parents said is, do not be fooled by what you see. That if you need a tutor, go get one. And don't worry about what other people see. Or the worry for me was that, well, people are going to perceive that I shouldn't be at that college, that I'm not smart enough, that I was there because I was Black, not because I had the grades or the smarts or the whatever it was that brought me to be at the college. And they said, look, we are not even gonna, my father's a professor, right? So I knew he was telling me the truth. He was like, look, I'm gonna tell you straight up, white kids have tutors. They've had them all through high school. They have them in college. you don't see them going to the tutor, but trust me, they have a tutor. So I said, if you need a tutor, go get one. And you don't have to like tell everybody you have a tutor. You can do it out in the open. You could do it behind closed doors, what have you. And so what that taught me was that sometimes what we see on the surface of people in power is not just them alone doing it. What we don't see is all the support they have behind them, but we see support as something that says we're weak versus the thing we need in order to really pull ahead, right? So when we were doing SB 803, the state, California state certification, peer certification bill, when I realized I didn't know enough about policy, especially about Medicaid policy and about how some of the legislative processes work in California, because it is its own state like any other state. We have some interesting things that other states don't have. I said, okay, I'm going to go get me a mentor. And I went and got a mentor, and that mentor was behind the scenes, and I would share things, and we would write statements together, and then I would show up and say, like, nobody knew I had this mentor behind the scene until I was finally like, okay, now this stuff is way over my head. I need to have people talk to the mentor, But I think that's one of the things around that is so important for leaders, especially leaders of color, leaders from marginalized communities, to, again, see that it is not about the person themselves. It is about those relationships that are developed. It is about the support those relationships provide you and the expertise, because no way in heck are our leaders, and I don't think a good leader should ever be one that is one who does it by themselves. I don't think that's a good leader.
No, I actually agree with you. Like, so it's this, and I've struggled with this for a while, like this concept of like heroism or sheroism, that it's one individual that will save the day, is really a false notion. Like, it totally is against the concept of coming together, working together, and seeing us collectively. So when somebody says, well, I saved the day, that's good. But actually, I don't think so, because some people around them probably sacrifice whatever they did to get you to do there. So I really feel this concept of working collectively and see who different places we're in, different changes, it's really a community that comes together to support one individual sometimes, right? And to not be ashamed to say, there were 100 people behind me.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. There's some level of humility that has to happen while you're being unapologetic. It might seem a bit like an oxymoron, but it's not an oxymoron at all. It's actually exactly, I think, more and more what's needed, particularly now in our nation as a whole, not just mental health, but this recognition that, again, it takes a village. I don't want to borrow that from, but it does. It takes a village, it takes a community. And then how can we turn to our communities to support us as we support our communities as well? So that's really powerful.
Yeah. And I feel like we have been taught to believe that, sort of this individualistic, like, it is the goal. And I'm thinking, and I struggle. Like, I came to this country, like, learning that in grad school and realizing, no, that's not how it works. Like, if I look at every successful person, when they do their biography, it's like everybody else that supported them, but when they were in their height of whatever they're doing, people didn't talk about it. And I feel like, well, that's so weird with all the people around them. And I feel like we really need each other. Like, I really believe we need each other to survive. Like, especially in this time when there's all these, climate change, we need to band together to make changes so that we can survive. Right?
Exactly. I mean, I think this idea of, leadership academy, leadership support, I certainly can think of some agencies in California that would be very interested in thinking about. I mean, we do have a, leadership. Did we meet at no, we didn't meet at the Leadership Academy. These are California things, or maybe people outside of California. But, I think there are a lot of leadership academies. And the question becomes, how do they take on these issues that are unique to people of color, people from the intersectionality, et cetera? Because I don't think that those are some of the things that we double down on for us. And then again, how do we create pockets of specific support so that we can go places where we feel safe? And I know too, as lived experience, if I have this big fear, if I ever talk about, I'm not feeling well, then suddenly it's like, well, we knew you got that mental illness, and and I have heard, people have concern about, people with mental health conditions leading organizations or, having leadership and executive positions, and thinking, well, really that should be reserved for somebody who is stronger or doesn't have a mental illness. And I'm like, that stronger person could, have any kind of condition that will affect their ability to work, and they'll need to take time off. They could have cancer. Who knows? I mean, we just don't know. So it's almost, well, it is discriminatory to say people with mental health conditions can't do certain work. You don't know what they can do until they do what they're doing.
Exactly. And I feel like that's sort of that box that we are all trying to be put in, like, oh, you can only do this and you can only do that. And I feel like we need to just start changing that. So, and also the reality, like, when I was, again, beginning in this field, when I'm looking at leaders, they talk about everything is fine and dandy. And I'm thinking, like, of course, like, I'm saving the world, I'm doing this. And then on a different conversation, they're like, man, that was really hard. I have to deal with this, and that. Like, why can't we be authentic and say, there is some opportunity being a leader in this role. Here are the really great things, and here are the struggles. And because it makes you human. So I look at these leaders, again, early on saying, like, man, they were perfect. I need to be perfect. And now I'm thinking, like, oh my, no. And so
that's too much pressure.
It also gives you, I think, a reality check of, like, what are you really getting yourself into? Because sometimes, again, in my role, there's all these technicalities, but we have experts in my team that know the
yes, exactly.
So I don't need to know all of that, but I think what I, in my role, really need is, like, the face, really the policy, all that stuff, and the people skills, because, I get calls pretty often and saying, like, I was not very happy with your service. How can I mean, so I need to be able to navigate that. And I feel like that's the people skills of really saying, like, sorry that your experiences is really, poor. What can we do to make it better? Right. When you want to be defensive and say, well, we've done everything we can. Right. But so I think that's the piece, but that you can be targets. And I feel like that's the kind of authenticity that we don't talk about. So I would love to think about how do we support these, leaders of color in the space, or the emerging ones that saying, like, I want to be in your place in 10 years. Like, and let me tell you the realities, and let me also support you so that you are tougher, smarter, more authentic to who you are. Because if not, people are going to try to break you down.
Exactly. I'm in. That is something we definitely should do. I'm writing it down. So, I'll be back in touch with you after we're done to figure out, like, I always say, well, it's pinky in the brain, but not pinky in the brain. Like, how do we take over the world? But it's not us taking over the world. It's really us helping other people to live into what they see as, what they want to do in this field, in their future, and especially as leaders. So, if there's one thing that you want to leave folks with, and I'll leave it wide open because we've talked about a lot of different things, I always like to leave people with something maybe actionable that they could do, whether it be in their leadership role, whether it be related to, mental health system transformation, whether it be, what they can do in their communities. What one thing would you want to leave folks with?
Oh man, that's sort of,
a setup. It's a setup.
It's a setup. I mean, I have a couple of. I mean, first of all, it's sort of just amazing to talk to you. You really looked up to you too. Like, you are just, for me, so relatable. But you bring so much humility to the work. And when I saw you at that, that past sort of presentation, I was just like, man, I should really try to connect more with Karis and really, because you're very inspiring to me. And and not just because you're doing all of these policy changes, it's just because you're real, and I feel like that's really what we need. So I just want to say, like, it's an honor to be on the podcast.
Thank you.
The thing for me, and this is more of my story, I grew up being invisible. Invisibility to some degree was a way to survive. And coming to this country of also being seen as sort of, in the Asian model minority myth about you're quiet and you're invisible, that's sort of like, there's some pattern there. But now I realize, coming out, being open about who I am, and really striving to live fully authentically, I think it's really important to be visible, to really be visible. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect, or you have to be articulate, that you have to always look good, or look like you come, be visible as your fully authentic self, right? Because that tells other people that they don't have to be perfect, that they are valuable for who they are anyway. It doesn't have to be that they're perfect, they're educated, they look nice, they smell nice. It's just you come as you are. Because in a world that pressures us to conform and to be somebody else, it is so easy to be invisible and to be treated as invisible. And I'm calling your folks who are listening to your podcast is to be visible and to be unapologetic in their own full authentic self. And that is courage every day. And that is something that we all should strive for, is to come out and to be who we are and love who we are, really.
Yes.
Okay,
so
message.
Now I have tears in my eyes. I really do. This is wow, you just hit me like in my heart, which you do, Jay. That's, oh my gosh, you do this every time. Why did I let you do this to me today? But the reason you do this is that's been my struggle as well. And I think, we're pushed to this invisibility. And even today in my, life with all the things that I've done, I still struggle with this feeling invisible and also wanting to be invisible. And I named this podcast Unapologetically Black Unicorns because I'm actually living into being unapologetically Black unicorn. I'm not that yet all the time. So I want to thank you for reminding me and all of us about the importance of being visible and being authentic. It's just so critically important. And what do you say? When the student is ready, the teacher shows up. So today you have been my teacher. I am the student and I am ready to receive that message and walk it forward. I hope everybody else is as well. So thank you so much for being with me today on Unapologetically Black Unicorns.
Really, I'm grateful just to be here. Thank you.
Sure thing. And we look forward to everybody joining us next week.